Welcome to Bridging the Gap, Ages, Stages, and Perspectives. I'm your host, Caroline Blumberg. I'm a 34-year-old millennial born and raised in Miami.
And I'm your co-host, wendiblum. I am 62 years young and part of what's coined the baby boomer generation. It's really hard to believe I'm considered a baby boomer. What's up with that? I'm also a mom and a wife, and I call myself an impact strategist. And here on our show, our philosophy is that you are never too young or too old. Hence, Caroline and I coming together to shine some light and some insight to that saying.
We're friends, colleagues, and business partners here to share our different points of view on lifestyle and business, from health and wellness to spirituality, fashion, and the arts.
And by the way, Caroline, who is in her 30s, knows I always tell her she's wise beyond her years. Together, we have the great honor to have real conversations with extraordinary leaders on a variety of topics that matter. On this week's episode, we have a fantastic guest who is here with us from Toronto, Canada, here in South Florida. So welcome, Steven.
Thank you. Great to be here. Love the warm weather here. Hope I can stay as long as I can.
Well, you definitely want to be here this time of year.
Yeah.
This is really ideal, pristine. We're recording here in April. Summer, it's a little tough, so we'll have to come up to you in Toronto. Yeah. That's also a great city. Steven, you have had so much success in your life. You're an entrepreneur at heart. You've been involved in the digital world and in media. You've worked with big brands and personalities, IBM, Motorola, Eileen Fisher, and then so much more. You transitioned into working with world-renowned teachers like Eckhart Tolle and Gary Zukav. And Eileen Fisher in that world. And then you segued into being a coach and stepping into a whole different side of the business where you were behind the scenes, elevating other people and growing their visibility to now being a teacher of healthy love. So we're going to definitely want to know a lot more about that. And an important conversation because we're talking about emotion and you don't normally hear, healthy and love together. You hear finding, looking for love, that kind of thing. And so we really look forward to diving deep with you on that conversation.
What was it like growing up in your era of Generation X?
Good question. Well, this is pre-social media. And so remember that people generally have a need to be seen and to be validated and to feel like they make a difference. And so in our day, a lot of the way that we found that was through the way we dressed. Conformity through clothes, through activities, in the conversations we would have, in the cars we would drive. And so you couldn't one-up someone with a post and be able to say, I got so many likes. And so it was more of a popularity contest around how many friends you have. And so a lot of the same dynamics and being somebody who is popular, to be liked in a certain way, was still there, and it was just different. And so we were kind of like a middle generation between the baby boomers, who were some way that was a cool generation. The music, and just the way that they started to see the world through a different view at that point. And then came us, and then after that, where the people got into the digital age. And so, it's definitely its own unique stage, and it had its own benefits and challenges. We were very naive to a lot of things. We didn't know crime. We didn't know safety. We didn't know security in the way that the next generation did. We still kept our doors open at night, and we could 12 years old, I could go and take the subway and be going downtown to a concert. I could travel to different cities and my mother wasn't freaking out. Well, sometimes she was, but
She didn't tell you. She was freaking out.
no, I didn't
she
tell
just
her.
Didn't tell you.
And I didn't always tell her where I was going. But it was different that way too. So it was nice in that way. It was innocent still, but we were the generation who watched that change in front of our eyes. Things really changed for us as the next generation came in, and we realized we're not in Kansas anymore. We've got to figure out what this is, and we had to bring in social media and figure out what it is to us. We're so much more exposed than we used to be. What's our obligation to be seen and to use that as the way to determine or define who we are.
Well, I want to ask you, so you're talking about clothing and your identity. That's what I hear you saying, is you're finding yourself and your footing in the world growing up. Mm-hmm. And the difference between, I want to ask you this, between men and women. So as a man, as a young man in your teenage years and your early 20s, what perception did you have of your male counterparts? Were you friends with women and men? So what was that like for you?
I was, but there are very strong stereotypes too. I mean, the male stereotype was to be very manly and strong and certain and assured and cool. That was very present in that stereotype. And the girls on the opposite side, they were soft and nice, and maybe not like the generation before the baby boomers, but they were still cool in a way, but they were, in their own social way, very girl-like. And so there wasn't a lot of mixing of the stereotypes in those days. Like if you were different, and this is where I had a problem. It was not really okay to be different if you wanted to have a lot of friends and to be liked. It was important to conform, and the clothing showed it. There were certain brands that came up, Lacoste and Jordache jeans, and just things you had to have. I remember being in tears with my parents when I was like 13 years old because they didn't want to buy me a Lacoste shirt, and I was like, I can't go back to school without one. You don't understand, Mom. This is big stuff, And like, can you imagine like the pressure I was feeling for stuff like that? And there was homophobia was prevalent, and misogyny, and it was hard. I mean, in those days, that it wasn't just about homophobia, it was about the sensitive stereotype. It was anything too feminine for a male was not okay. And that in itself could make you different enough to, I saw people who were quickly removed from circles of friends, and their lives changed quickly just from being themselves, just from expressing their feelings in a more genuine, honest way. So there was a real danger in that time of becoming too authentically yourself if it didn't conform to what the social norms were. And today, the next generation, it's getting better. In a way, I mean, it still exists, but now it just boggles my mind how the differences are more accepted. It doesn't matter if it's your look and your hair color and your earrings and your tattoos, or your gender and how you want to be seen, and your pronouns. I mean, that's amazing. We didn't have that in those days.
Who influenced you growing up, and what was it like feeling different?
It was very challenging for me because I identify as a more sensitive male. I just feel my feelings, and I can't really do anything differently about that. So repressing that was very hard. I liked role models who were balanced in that way, that could be male and could still show their strength of character and their determination and good boundaries, and still be acknowledging that they have vulnerabilities, that there are certain things that bother them or that are challenging for them, and they have feelings, all the same spectrum as women, because we all do. We all get sad, we all get scared, and we feel happy, joyful, strong, elated. So it was hard for me to see good role models. And it's funny because one of my role models that I learned a lot from, you're going to think this is funny, but I became a Star Trek fan because I just found that the role models on that show gave me something to hold on to, like a possibility of where we're going as human beings, that it's okay to be authentic. It's okay to be different. It's actually cherished in these shows. And the way that they would have conversations and go through even adversity, they would have real conversations about trying to understand what it's like from the other person's point of view all the time. They wouldn't just influence themselves and say, this is the way we have to do it. This is what I believe it. Be like, okay, how do we find a way that meets both our needs? And so there was real collaboration. And that was my hope, to be able to grow into a world that has more of that, which it is happening, but, at a certain rate.
I love that you gave the analogy that you gave, and based on you feeling different, and here you are, and you're making a career decision. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that time? Going back to that time really clearly, right? Yeah, okay, and you're thinking about, where do I want to build my career? Walk us through your thinking process.
Yeah. So for me, being aware that there's something inside of me that needs choice, freedom, creative expression, because I'm very creative and I have a quick thinking mind. I have, like ADHD personality trait. I needed something that can incorporate all those things. And to me, entrepreneurship just fit the bill. I had some short experiences working with corporations, and I could just see that I would have to have conformed more than I was comfortable to be part of that environment. And so my career choices, early on, I was thinking of becoming a doctor, but later on, it just, business took over for me. It was just so exciting to watch what I can create and do. And I'm a collaborator. So I like to make connections between people selling things or producing things, or just being a facilitator in that way. So I started companies. My first company I started when I was 16 years old. And it was import-export. I got the rights to a line of really unique air purification products in Wichita, Kansas. The owner there, he didn't even know how old I was. I had to make sure my mother answered the phone with the name of the company.
Oh, that's really funny. You had to coach your mom through that.
I was coaching my mom, and she was amazing.
And she went with it.
She went with it. She thought it was cute. I operated out of the garage. It was my warehouse. I got a grant from the Canadian government to go down to Panama and start exhibiting the products as part of their contingency in the conference that was on, called Expo Comer at the time. And I'll never forget the look on the face of the Canadian entourage as he met me for the first time. And I said, "Oh, hi, I'm Steven Goldhar. Nice to meet you." He goes, "Steven Goldhar? No,
You're supposed to be older.
I'm supposed to be older." He goes, and he just had this big. I was turning red. I was like flushing because because he was so surprised. I couldn't even go for drinks with some of the other people after I wasn't old enough. So that was my path in wanting to create a life for me where I had the freedom and choice, and I could remain creative and to follow my heart. And that's because I'm sensitive, and I'm always attached to my heart and what's going on. So I made sure that I made that into a career.
That's fascinating. And then somehow you segued into working with really, really big brands. So what was that like? Take us on the journey to IBM and Motorola and Eileen Fisher and all the things.
I was surprised to find myself land in a position in the early 2000s when I got into, when the internet first basically was created, and I started to produce websites for some, local companies, and they were quickly, within months, started asking me, "Well, I got this website. Now, how do I make it work for me and get business to it and convert into sales?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know." And so I started looking into it, and there were these search engines, and Overture was the was the pay-per-click giant at the time. And then Google came into it, and there was a whole system design, and I was a pioneer in this. It was so early on that when companies like IBM got wind of what I was doing with other clients, they called me in. So I was a sole proprietor at the time who was being asked by companies like IBM to come and show them how to do it. How do we market our products this way? And it was such a big deal that their media company, Mindshare at the time, was trying to restrict what I can do. Like, I was becoming an approved vendor, and they were like, you can't do this. We handle the media. And so there was this big meeting where I was sitting there with people from IBM and Mindshare, showing them what I did. And they were having to say, well, we don't know what that is. Like, and they were scared. They were scared. Can you imagine that you have a huge contract with the company and someone comes in and is doing something you haven't even seen before? And they didn't even shake my hand when they walked out. They just walked out. They tried to learn as much as they can. It was very rude. But
they had to go study.
Yeah. And so that's how I got to, and then I worked with Ogilvy and Mather, a U.S. agency in the States, for 4 years and helped them to develop some of these skills. And so that's how I made a name in that industry, because I was an early adopter and I knew the players in the industry and, was able to help them get on board. And so I developed Sundance Media was my agency that worked with companies to help them get into the digital age. But then you want to hear this, how I get into people like Eckhart Tolle and Alan Fisher. So, I'm very much a spiritual person in the sense that I've always been trying to figure out what it means to be me, a human being, to be happy, to be in right relationship with people. So I've always been doing this work in my 20s. I just never talked about it with anybody. And then things started to change. We have these authors, these well-known people who are drawing large crowds of people who want to know about life and how we can change our perspective to life and start going inward. So I had a very big downturn in my health, and it was after my divorce, and I just was working so hard. I collapsed. I was so toxic I couldn't even think straight, and I had to correct all this. I had to learn what living was about again and how to be healthy and how to take care of myself on a physical level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, because I was bankrupt in every way possible at that point. It came as a total shock. You can imagine how hard that would be to lose everything in a short period of time. It was the first time I ever prayed to God. I didn't know who God was. I had no spirituality. I kind of went too far into the business world and lost myself, so I didn't know who I was praying to, but I was just praying for whatever was listening. And it was not shortly after that, through a connection of mine and someone who knew all the work I've done as a pioneer in digital marketing, that he was, as a partner with Eckhart Tolle, producing one of the first subscription-based services with content that's ever been produced, called Eckhart Tolle TV. And he brought me in as the marketing expert, and I grew a relationship with the team and with Eckhart and worked with them for, another 4.5 years. And that's when I met Gary Zukav and helped him with his message. And I realized I need this for myself. I need to figure out how I can stay around this kind of message as part of my work. It fed me. The community, people actually cared. I remember people coming up to me after the conferences, just knowing that I was the guy behind the scenes who was making a lot of the digital things available. And they'd say, thank you, Steven, for your part in what you do. It matters so much to me. It's changing my life. Like, wow, I don't think I've ever changed anyone's life in that way. I mean, when I was marketing razors for Gillette and cars for Ford, I never heard anybody say that to me. And it was so meaningful, and I wanted more of that. How else can I help people change their lives? And so that fed me. And eventually, I was looking for opportunities. I met Eileen Fisher through, the person who brought me into Eckhart Tolle, and we started to set up a center for her to educate women on how to be better leaders and be empowered. And when you start watching the transformations that happen in people, in Eileen Fisher's community. What a wonderful lady, by the way, like the dedication she has to providing these with her own money to people. But everyone I work with, when you see what it does to people and you watch someone wake up and transform into someone that they weren't before and you see the difference, it's infectious. Watching them opened me up, and it helped me open up and realize I can do that. And that fed my own journey, because the journey ultimately is, how can I be authentically me, to express myself and what I feel and what my experience is and be completely honest about it, to know what my needs are and how am I going to fulfill those needs in my life? Do I know how to express myself? Do I feel good about that? It's a journey. That was my journey. These teachers helped me give myself permission to do more of that work because they were role models for me.
Is that what led you to Healthy Love?
Exactly. So it just so happened that while I was working for this gentleman, Greg, who brought me to his partnership with Eckhart Tolle here in Miami, his girlfriend at the time was Rachel Levy, who is a very experienced therapist here in Miami, very, very gifted actually. And she was talking to me about Healthy Love back then. That's like 12 years ago. And I was just consulting for her to help to start what she wanted to create. I never thought I would be part of it. I never thought I would be a Healthy Love teacher. But after COVID and everything changed for me like it did for everybody else, the things that I used to do just, changed and stopped. And I, was thinking maybe this is a time to reinvent what I'm doing. And a friend of mine just gave me feedback one day that the way I was supporting him was so helpful. He just thought, have you ever thought of doing this more? And the truth was I had. I mean, it's part of my nature to help and be directly relating to others to support them. I just never saw it in a way that I could actually become that. It just, I don't know, to be honest, it felt small to me to be a coach. It felt like I work with lots of people. I work with thousands of people at a time. But then I realized that there's this longing to connect with people deeper, and you can do that when you work one-on-one with them. You can, and there's so much wisdom I've gained to impart that to people, to be able to actually hold them in their journey was special. And so Rachel quickly saw me doing this shift, and she says, well, I know the business experience you have, the digital experience you have, and I know your heart. Why don't you come work with me in Healthy Love and help me build it? So I did. And as I started to see the content she created, like my first love was the self-love course she created. I mean, I saw this concept explained in many ways from many teachers. Tara Brach is great at that, radical acceptance, and I saw great examples of self-love. I didn't realize how little I was able to actually practice that. I didn't understand how hard it was to know how I speak to myself, how I hold myself. But it was through Rachel's course that she broke it down to these 7 steps that made it possible to actually understand the process of what it's like to be honest enough and compassionate enough and really understand where my self-worth comes from, to take it all apart, map myself out, and watch how I hold myself, whether I'm loving and supporting myself or not. And it was brilliant. And so I quickly became a teacher of that. And today we are building out more tools because she's created, she's gifted in areas of shadow work and imago relationship theory and 12-step recovery wisdom, and there's many components that she's amalgamated. And I've never seen anything so effective and transform people so quickly as Healthy Love. And so I've decided to stay in this realm as a coach for people who are looking to really learn how to be in better relationship with themselves and others. And so that's how I got here.
Well, I'm a big Rachel Levy fan. I mean, she's the one that connected us. I mean, she really is phenomenal in the work that she does. You have really had such a broad experience across the board in your career and in your personal life. Someone who's listening to this, what would you say to them could be the simplest, easiest first step that they could take to finding themselves or connecting at a deeper level like you have?
Finding yourself takes a lot of honesty, and that's where the journey begins, in self-honesty. I'd say to them, really take the time to be with yourself in a quiet way, to notice things that maybe you didn't notice before. Like if there's no one telling me what to do or what's okay to feel or not, or if I'm thinking that I don't have to, be liked by this person or do something to, like that. What am I feeling? What's important to me? So first, I would say define your real values as a person. What is it that is important to you about life, about you, about interactions with people, about the way it works, the way that you want the world to work for you, and figure that out, because that's your foundation. It doesn't mean that you'll be able to get there that day.
I was going to say, they probably need some guidance. Is that something that you help people do?
Absolutely.
Okay, because that would be a tall order. We're talking about bridging the gap, so there's certainly a gap there. And I would highly recommend that I want to add to what you're saying because it's so valuable, knowing your values is valuable, is to find somebody that can support you along the way. So can you share with our listeners how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, you definitely can email me, Steven Goldhar, Steven with a V, Goldhar at
We'll put it in the show notes as well. Show notes.
stevengoldharmac.com or stevengoldhar.com. You can go, we'll lead you to a page that'll tell you a little bit more about me. It's but I would say, whether it's myself or someone else, what you said, Wendi, is very important. It's hard to do this work on your own. It's just the way we are built as humans. It's hard to see ourselves, and we need someone to reflect back to us, what even some of the things the values and the things that we don't even know about. The things that are important, because that's the GPS for us, the values. Then it's about being honest and how to hold that and make a plan to get there. But ultimately, what I would say is the goal at the end of it is to be able to use the experience you have as a human, the feelings, the things that are going on inside, to drive you to the real needs that you have as a person. It's all about getting to the needs. What do I need to feel fulfilled? What do I need to feel satisfied? What do I need to feel loved? How do I what do I need from myself, and what do I need from others? And then knowing good communication styles to be able to ask for that and express yourself. Like what we're doing today. This is a show about self-expression, isn't it? We're trying to figure out what is everybody's needs as they go through the different ages, stages, and perspectives.
Thank you so much for all of your wisdom. Caroline, I know I walked away. I'm walking away with some jewels. What about you?
Yeah, I'm definitely walking away with, some good pieces of advice.
In your 30s that you can carry. You've got a lot of years to carry all this wisdom forward.
I do. And I have people that I can maybe say them to, or, just a quick text message like, I heard someone say this and I thought it would help you. Or
yeah, it's great to pass along the golden nuggets, and that's what this show is all about. So very wise and insight. So thank you so much for being on our show today, Steven, and to our listeners, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Bridging the Gap, Ages, Stages, and Perspectives. Subscribe to the podcast today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Leave us a review and let us know what you think. Share some suggestions of what topics and guests you might want to hear on the podcast next.
Okay, high five, Caroline. Hey, Steven. Woo!
Thank you. It was great.